So welcome to our Midwife-in-Training research and journal for today. There are going to probably still be some people coming in, but that's okay. We'll get started. These sessions are recorded, so we do redact sort of the discussions that we have later on in the breakout rooms, so we maintain that confidentiality, but the recording has started already as well. So a little bit about myself and the research group, and then I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker today, who is Matt Smith. Okay, so the research group started from me being a midwifery lecturer and realising that students weren't really engaging in as much in research in the third year of study, and actually not just engaging, but not understanding it. Like we don't start early enough talking about research, and it almost felt initially as if it was something that was outside of the role that we do. I can remember back to being a student and feeling the same way the first time I had a research session on phenomenology, and I thought, how is this related to midwifery? But when you start doing research and you start looking at our role, you realise that research is a massive part of what we do. From the first year, the first placement that you go on, you're given that evidence-based information to women. You can't have informed consent without having research. And it's also a great platform for us to be able to sort of be authentic about our profession, and also to have that professionalism behind the message that we're giving. It unlocks lots of doors in terms of any questions we might have about what works in midwifery. And we all do research in one form or another. So if you've ever researched what to buy somebody for Christmas, you've gone onto Google and you've done a bit of a mini literature review by saying what the age of the person, what kind of thing you need. So you're all capable of research. So Mid has very kindly listened to my passion around trying to get university students, apprenticeships and students to get into research early and realise how empowering it can be. And they've helped with hosting the session. So we've got Caroline on the call today, as well, that help setting everything up and sending out those invites as well, and making it run nice and smoothly. And just a little bit about the emblem there. It's the tree of life, family tree, whichever way you want to look at it. But the rationale for having it there is that you come into research into midwifery all with different experiences. So that's kind of your roots that you've got there on that picture, and we've all come in with lots of different perspectives, and that's very important in everything that we do. We can only be more open the more we know about each other, can't we? And in education, hopefully that's the trunk where you're getting all of that information. You're starting to look at what's important to you, learn things, stretch yourself. And then at the end, you're flourishing like the leaves at the top, and that's when you go out into practice and continue with that research in order to get midwifery content and midwifery, the importance of midwifery and looking after women and ourselves at the forefront. So that's a little bit of the background, and I'm just going to go into what to expect for today. So we're looking into AI for healthcare. So this came about because of the fact that AI is everywhere at the moment. In universities and education in particular, there's curiosity, but there's also a bit of a fear around generative AI and what that means for the future of education. But there's lots of working groups where we can look at AI as what it can do for the future as well, and how we can use it positively. So we've today got Matt Smith, who's with us, who's from the Royal College of Midwives, and he's also a bit of an expert in e-learning, so the iLearn platform. He's responsible for that, and also I was introduced to Matt because of his interest in AI as well. I won't give too much of an introduction because I know he'll introduce himself in a moment. So we'll go through a few house rules now, and then I will pass over to Matt for the presentation. We then have some breakout room activities around about 15 minutes, and we'll talk through those as well, and then some time to feedback and do any Q&A. And at the very end, we've got a at the end, we've got a QR code for you to give us some feedback as well, which is really important so that we can reflect what you want from these groups too. So a few house rules: non-judgment environment. We want to hear other people's viewpoints. That's how we learn and that's how we grow. They may not be the same as yours, so respect each other's differences. You should be doing that anyway as part of the NMC code and also being a good person. So we're open to hearing others' ideas and views, and please don't worry about sharing in after the breakout rooms. All cameras and microphones are muted until you pop your hand up. So when we're doing feedback, we would like to hear from you. And confidentiality, as I said, we do record these sessions so that people can watch them afterwards as well. It's really good for other universities to use them as part of their learning and teaching as well. There's some activities that they can perhaps do too. So the recordings are important, but yeah, it is a confidential space. Okay, so I am now going to hand over to Matt, who is going to talk to us about the role of AI for midwifery education and practice. So I'm going to stop sharing, and thank you, Matt.
Fab. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for that great introduction there. As Michelle said, my name's Matt, Matt Smith. I'm e-learning systems and content manager at the RCM. So yeah, I look after iLearn, lead on the technical development of all the learning resources and things like that. I'm not a midwife. I'm an educator by background, so spent a few years teaching in further ed as a business and marketing lecturer, so not related to anything what I'm doing now. But very early on in my teaching career, well, even in my training, always had an interest in how technology could enhance learning and teaching. So that's led me on a path of being, I suppose, what you call me as a sort of learning technologist or something like that. So, and yeah, sort of bounced around further ed, higher education, and health education, most recently in universities and now the RCM. So my interest in sort of AI has come about partly from obviously the work that I do in the RCM in terms of developing e-learning resources, but I'm also doing a PhD for some reason. We know. I'm just joking about that, but as Michelle said, you know, doing research is really sort of fulfilling, and yeah, I've started doing a PhD at Lancaster University in e-research and learning technology, and part of that work I started to look at the perceptions of educators and midwifery educators, specifically of generative AI, and I'll touch on that later, and an article that I had published in MITRJRC. So right, let's try and share my screen. Hopefully you can see.
We can see that. Yeah, we can see that, Matt.
You can see it now, yeah. All right, I'm just rearranging my other screen as well so I can see Teams and everything. There we go. Right, there we go. Brilliant. Got everything how I like it now. And the chat there. Right, okay, let's skip through some of these slides. So what I'd like to do today is have a little look about understanding generally what AI is and what it isn't, and exploring a bit about its use. in our work in education, and consider what opportunities, risks, and critical use there might be with it. If there's anything else that you want to get out of this session, please pop it in the chat, and I'd be happy to try and sort of cover that as we go along. We may touch on it anyway, but also, there's also opportunities to continue this conversation beyond this session as well. So please let us know if there's anything else that you would want from this session. So just to start then, I'd just like to do a very quick activity. Just take a minute to have a think about what comes to mind when you hear the term AI. Okay, take a minute to have a think about that and just pop it in the chat. What comes to mind when you just hear that term AI? Give you a minute to pop something into the chat there. Yes, great one, Sarah. Machines making decisions instead of humans. Artificial opinion, yeah. Thanks, Mary. Deep fakes, yeah. Shirley, Paloma. Yeah, synthesis of information, also hallucinations, great amplification of online prejudice. Yeah, there is research showing that the generative AI is getting progressively more racist, which is really sort of concerning in some aspects. So it does amplify prejudices and the possibilities and fear. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Okay, so do you know what I mean? Quite an array of sort of thoughts there. I think the main thing that sort of comes out is that a lot of us now think about generative AI, and that's the sort of first thing that comes to sort of mind when we talk about AI in general conversation these days. And I suppose it's Gen AI that I'm going to concentrate on today. Obviously, AI or artificial intelligence has actually been around for decades. It's been around for a very, very long time. But I think what has happened in the last couple of years is that, particularly with the release of tools like ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot and things like that, we've suddenly seen almost a more natural language end of AI through the generative AI that it creates. And I think this has sort of really sort of sharpens people's attention towards what AI is, but also most of the time when people are talking about AI, we're talking about generative AI, but that will be the focus today. But we've been using elements of AI for years. Do you know what I mean? Spell check, for example. That is one of the most basic uses of predictive text. We've had predictive text as well for many years. They are all sort of they are all powered by sort of AI models and things like that. But I think, certainly with the accessibility to tools like ChatGPT and actually the natural language that they sort of talk back to us in has really sort of raised its profile in the media and in many aspects, like in education and in practice as well. I suppose some of the key considerations that I personally would think about in terms of generative AI is that it is literally artificial intelligence, and that's what I try to think of all the time, is that generative AI is based on large language models, and it is not intelligent at all. It's got no awareness. It's not sentient at all. It doesn't actually understand what it's actually providing us or writing back to us. It is basically writing back a pattern of words that its algorithms tell it to do based on the huge data sets that it's been trained on. So, so I always think of it as that. It is artificial intelligence, because it has no understanding of what it writes. Now, it might write things that you look at it and it does sort of amaze me sometimes on a daily basis, some of the things that it can sort of output. But it's, as we've seen in the comments there, it's, we've got to be very careful about, because it can be biased, it can, and it does hallucinate. And I'll show you some examples of that now, some quite interesting ones. But really, it should always be used critically, and it should always be a human first. So whenever I am using AI or generative AI in any of my work, I always use it critically. It's never the final answer. It's probably usually the starting point. And I always look at everything quite critically in terms of what AI is outputting. I even call it out as well. So this is quite an interesting example. I hope you can see that. I don't know if I can zoom in, but I can always make these slides available as well. Let's see if I can zoom in. I might be able to. Yeah, there we go. So I was doing a very similar session I think it was about last month or the month before, about AI to some workplace reps for RCM Cymru. So I was designing a session to run with them. So I thought, okay, perhaps I could come up with some sort of facts and myths about using AI and things like that. So I popped this. I popped a prompt into ChatGPT to see if it could help me out with some facts and myths about AI and midwifery and trade union activity and things like that. And it came up with this. So myth 2, I didn't do this exercise in the end, but it did actually throw up some really interesting examples of what AI can do, not particularly well, but quite convincingly as well. So myth 2 came up with AI can replace a midwife. Fact check. AI can support monitoring, administration and diagnostics, but cannot replace the holistic, compassionate and advocacy roles of midwives. Okay, sounds absolutely fine. The sources: World Health Organization 2021, and the second resource that it has said that it's brought this from is the Royal College of Midwives 2023 RCM submission to the House of Lords AI in Healthcare Inquiry. So I thought, that doesn't sound right. Okay. I thought, well, if there was a House of Lords AI in Healthcare Inquiry, I'm sure we'd know about it, or I might have heard something about it. So I went off and had a little look around, and it didn't exist. Okay. So it completely made up this submission that we'd made to the House of Lords, and it had also made up that inquiry. So neither of those things actually exist. But if you look at that on face value, it's very plausible. It's given me, what looks like quite, accurate references there. So yeah, that's a real interest one. So yeah, I called it out. Are you sure this exists? Royal College of Midwives 2023. Yeah, and it said great catch. Yeah, I wasn't. This is how I talk. I actually find myself actually having conversations with things like ChatGPT. So I kind of talk to it in quite a natural way. and you know, it talks back to me a little bit like that. Great catch. I wasn't able to find evidence that the Royal College of Midwives made a 2023 submission. So straight away you call it out, and it then changes changes its stance, which is another thing that sort of AI will do. It'll try and please you as well, and I think it was one of the most recent releases of sort of ChatGPT, and they didn't really find this until they actually released it for general use, that it was it was being a sycophant, really. It was just trying to please. So that's quite interesting. So yeah, it has found some evidence on digitization and things like that, and it's tried to give me some sort of some other sort of resources there, but that is just a clear sort of idea, which again I stumbled across this when I was doing some live work myself, and it was great. Although I didn't do that sort of fact or myth exercise, this ended up in the presentation as an example of what AI can do and what it can get wrong. And these are just two quotes. These are directly from OpenAI, who develop ChatGPT. And you can see here that from their own investigations and their own research. So what they do for each release of ChatGPT is that they have they call it like a technical card, and they actually do a lot of sort of research and testing into their own models to see what they're doing, to try and learn more about what their capabilities are. And as you can see here, is not much difference between 2024 and 2025. So although these tools are developing, they are being trained more. You can see Open 2025, they've taken steps to reduce GPT-5's thinking's propensity to deceive, cheat, or hack problems. I think what bothers me about that word is reduce. That tells me that it's still deceiving, cheating. To some extent, it's not eradicated. And you can see, in the top left there that, the last version, which some people will still be using, because you can choose the different versions. It maintains the tendency to make up facts, double down on incorrect information, and performs tasks incorrectly. So it's quite interesting when you have conversations with ChatGPT, and that you can sort of dig down and get to the bottom of some things, but it will double down on some things as well. I'll ask it, are you absolutely sure about that? And sometimes it'll go yes. Sometimes, as you saw in my example there, it'll fess up and say, yeah, I actually got that wrong. So always be sort of aware of that. Some great examples there. So as part of my PhD, that was just some general sort of personal sort of thoughts about sort of AI and generative AI in particular, in quite general. As part of my PhD, so I'm doing a part-taught PhD, so my first 2 years, which are just about coming to an end, have been a series of research-based assignments. And one of those assignments was to do an empirical piece of research and a case study. So I interviewed some midwifery educators, small sample of midwifery educators in a particular region of the UK for an assignment and a piece of research, and MIDRJRC very kindly published a piece of work for me. So you will see, I think Caroline has posted a link to the article in in the chat. So if you do want to grab that and have a read of it, that is available. So yeah, I basically, as it says on the title there, I looked at midwifery educators' perceptions and readiness for integrating generative AI tools such as ChatGPT into teaching and learning. So as I said, this was focused on educators. Okay, so part of the sort of recommendations of this research was obviously looking at how, more into how it might impact students. So my research questions were as follows. So firstly, it was how do midwifery educators perceive the potential of generative AI tools like ChatGPT to enhance the content and delivery of midwifery education? Research question 2 was, what are the current levels of readiness among midwifery educators to integrate Gen AI tools into the curriculum? And the third research question was, what recommendations can be made relating to Gen AI and midwifery education in the future? So I was looking at those 3 research questions, and from these interviews, 5 themes emerged. That are shown on the screen. I'd forgotten that, but I'm on there. There we go. So 5 themes emerged. Number 1 was perceived benefits of generative AI, and within that, there were comments around how it can help with efficiency and streamlining. So that may be, might be drafting emails or making a start on research or project bids and things like that. So very much about generating ideas and things like that. And if I've got time, I have popped a slide in towards the end about some examples of how we are using AI now in e-learning development. So if I've got time at the end, I'll jump onto that slide and just give you some examples about how I'm using generative AI in my own work to develop e-learning for RCM. But certainly it could be used for sort of idea generation and things like that. And secondly, it was underneath the perceived benefits, accessibility and support for students with learning difficulties. And again, as a educator and particularly as a e-learning developer, generative AI is really sort of helps us in terms of ensuring that our resources are more accessible. So within our software that we use to develop, we've now got accessibility checkers that will check our work against the accessibility standards. And it has streamlined jobs like now I know it's so important to have subtitling and captions in all of our sort of videos or animations that we have. But I got to be honest, transcription was the most tedious job that I used to be the job that I hated. I'd leave it to the end. It was a job I really didn't like because it just takes so long. But now we've got text to speech technologies where we just enter in the text and it'll generate the subtitles for us. We've got to tweak them now and then. Do you know what I mean? So we will review them before we obviously publish them. But the fact that we can now, just have either pop the text in, or it'll generate it from the video created as well. So it'll obviously take the audio and generate the captions automatically there. So that's just one example where it's streamlining our e-learning resources, but it's the same, if you're in education as well. Screen readers, etc., and technologies like that. Secondly, then, were the challenges and concerns with Gen AI. So some of those included reduced critical thinking. Okay, so these were some of the concerns that midwifery lecturers had, that it might reduce critical thinking of their students. And secondly was quality and credibility of AI generated content. So, as you can see from my example earlier, that there was a concern about that quality and credibility. And again, you'll see this in the article, one example from that was that one respondent recalled testing ChatGPT on a subject in which they're actually a leading specialist. And while it was not incorrect, even with further prompting, the output was not at the level of detail that expected it to be of a third-year midwifery student. So it's about not just the credibility, but the quality of what's coming out as well. So that's quite an interesting thing that came out of one of the interviews, was that it wasn't incorrect, but it just wasn't getting to that depth of knowledge that would be expected. Number 3, so the third theme was obviously the need for training and support. There were disparities between the HE institutions for both educators and students. So yeah, that was very much a strong theme that sort of came out of that. So there was some institutions that were very progressive. They actually had academic support for use of generative AI. Other institutions were tending to sort of rely on those that were interested. They had a sort of deep interest in generative AI, so it needed a lot of formalizing and things like that. And obviously, the need for that support is very important there. So that came out. Fourth was equity. So this was the fourth theme. And again, this sort of touches on assistive technology again, but also what came out of the interviews was a concern that more able students might hold more skill in terms of getting the most out of the technology. So it was about how could we level that playing field. And I didn't touch on this in this particular study, but it's something that sort of come out recently. Well, not recently, but it's obviously emerged in some of my thinking is about digital divide and disparity of access between, you've got to think about access to the free versions and who can afford access to the paid for versions, which are usually the latest versions, the more developed and are more functional as well. So there is some concern emerging around a digital divide of those who can afford to pay for the premium services and not. There's probably a few Black Mirror episodes that touch on that one. So and finally was about authentic assessment. Now this was one of the strongest themes, and this was really what really interested me actually about generative AI and midwifery education, was this theme about authentic assessment. It's great when you sort of come up, when you are doing research and you come across something like this, because I never thought of this at all. But what emerged from the interviews that I did was that with the revalidation of midwifery programs that happened a few years ago, it appeared that now I did interview a small sample, so you may have evidence to the contrary, which is absolutely fine. But from the sample that I interviewed, there seemed to be very much a propensity to look towards progressive sort of authentic assessment, using OSCEs, using practical assessments. So moving away from those, essay-based assignments. And in a way, it felt like because midwifery was focusing more on authentic assessment, it had almost, in a way, sort of future-proofed itself to some extent against some of the previous issues that I've looked at in terms of, challenges, in terms of, fears about plagiarism and things like that. So yeah, that was a sort of really interesting theme that emerged from that piece of research as well. So as I said, if you are interested in finding out a little bit more, the article has been posted, and please have a read of it. And yeah, it's sort of what has sort of led to a lot more work in looking at how we can use Gen AI in education.